Hey guys, I'm Sharbin Sedino, and this is The Off Topic with Sharbin Sedino. Today we're talking about the influence of mass media on the government. We're going to get some experts on it and have a live call. But first, guys, listen, Windows ain't gonna wash themselves. That's why this episode of The Off Topic is sponsored by Will's Washing & Co. Go to 1-800-Windows.com and use promo code SHARB to get 10% off your first purchase. That's 1-800-Windows.com and code SHARB for 10% off. Again, that's SHARB for 10%. Now, back to the show. So there's this really interesting idea I've been thinking about lately. It's the idea that mass media, like TV news and newspapers and magazines, act like a fourth branch of government. An article from an old blog, Eat the State, which I have to access via the Wayback Machine because it's dead, says that the concept is rooted in the idea that the media's responsibility, at least corporate media's responsibility, to inform the public is essential to the healthy functioning of a democracy. And even when a democracy might not be functioning properly, the media's influence on how democracy plays out in the real world is relatively transparent. We'll go to Justin Idsoe, professor of American history at Kadokawa University.
Thank you, Sharbin. Now, the media has significantly increased over the past decade, so much that the U.S. economy has even been impacted. The creation of social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook have given small businesses a voice. Social media gives people a medium to express themselves, politically or otherwise. Something like Donald Trump. He can tweet about just about anything, and it has the potential to incite chaos, panic, and mass riots. It's amazing, because 100 years ago, something like this wasn't even heard of. Big buzzwords like fake news have come up in the news recently. So what makes this news fake? How do people know what news is fake? Is it the news that tells us? There's absolutely no debating that the press is biased, be it the left, right, or that weird sludge in the middle. But throughout history, the press has intentionally censored, or just about lied, to the American people. Even as early as World War II, the press used propaganda to spur hatred against the Jews, Germans, and Japanese Americans. Because of this, the innocent Japanese Americans living in the United States had to live in internment camps. Such things like yellow journalism became a medium for artists to express themselves, albeit racistly. These newspaper comics created an overseas outbreak of international conflict that led to the expansion of the US to the Asian and the West. Taking all this into account, the media, and specifically the press, is able to call out the government, the three branches, and recently even, the president himself. One bad, well-written article is enough to dethrone even the highest elected official. Now it's time to hand it over to Amarjot Singh, Kirano Review writer.
Thank you again for having me here, Sharbin, and thank you, Justin, for the introduction. As a journalist from Kinnear Review, of course, it's one of my many jobs and my many interests to see how we would bode when media acted as a fourth branch of government, or was officially deemed the fourth branch of government in society or even in politics. And of course, as technology continues to grow increasingly more and advance, the media has a greater effect on government and people. And I'll delve right into that momentarily. But say if the media should be officially declared the fourth branch of government, I mean, media does control what citizens do and don't see, as powers much like those of the other branches, but without checks and balances against each other. So corruption in media is one of the very first things that we have to look at, because those are usually seen to go hand in hand. And let's start off with, there are many different facets of the media, such as internet, TV, social media, very popular, Facebook, Twitter, even Instagram nowadays. Media has control over what is or isn't viewed. This can lead to most information being often just partial or misleading, sometimes, more often than not, untrue. Negative media strains other branches, of course, and view of democracy can become distorted for citizens such as you and I. And we see that's prevalent today. Media has unrestrained powers. It shows this power over the other branches. It is not checked by any of the others. And no check system for the media allows for substantial power. Incorporating media into government would hold it more accountable, but also make it less dependent on large commercial interests, which I see as a benefactor of that. But if the media continually grows as technology advances, and technology allows citizens to become more involved politically, of course, we've seen that in the past few decades of our history. This makes media a very powerful tool. Under democracy, government should remain, or ideally should remain, uncorrupt and unbiased, of course. These are all ideal standards that we are talking about. However, with growing power, media becomes more subjective, exaggerated, and less to focus on the facts and more on the show and influence. Powers that, Under democracy, government should remain uncorrupt and unbiased. However, with growing power, media becomes more subjective, and we've seen, of course, influential, exaggerated, and often than not untrue. Powers, in my opinion, should be held in place to control this if the media were to become a fourth branch of government. So, leading this to my conclusion, making the media the fourth branch of government would have the power to put an end to much of the corruption if this were an ideal world, while allowing it into the freedom to serve citizens of the U.S. more effectively and responsibly. Yes, I see that as one of the many advantages of having media on our side and incorporated within politics. Media officially becoming the fourth branch of government would also stop many misleading, untrustful sources, which is kind of murky and murtled because the media itself can result in being misleading and untrustful, and that's where we draw the line. And yeah, things get complicated down that way, but we won't go down there. Anyway, allowing citizens to trust more in the media / government, of course, and citizens such as you and I would develop more informed political stances, and I see that as also another advantage of media being there. Of course, we have to limit power of the media. It cannot be an unchecked branch of government, as the other three are. There must be checks and balances. And as citizens of the United States, do not let the corruption of the media easily sway your beliefs in the political aspect as well as all the aspects which media ultimately affects. And all in all, although media is not officially the fourth branch of government, it still implements So although media is not the fourth branch of government officially, it definitely plays a role in politics and uses social intimidation to keep the other branches of power in check. And that's where I think the media serves as both a watchdog and an alternative fourth branch of government. Now, before this interview started, Peter already gave me a little tidbit of what his stance was on this matter, and I'm going to allude this to what is about to come and to Peter's portion of this interview. So I'll hand the mic over right to Peter. Stage is yours.
Thanks for having me on Off Topic, Sharbin, and thank you for the introduction, Mr. Singh. So here's where it gets interesting and why I'm excited to bring this point up today. The internet influence, along with independent media, has severely changed the way that we look at our common society. I think about Facebook every night when I turn on my phone trying to get the inside scoop. Facebook brings up these whack private sources that seem to highlight the important topics. But are these websites and sources truly correct? That is what's wrong with our nation today. We know the variety of bias in today's media. We don't know if we can trust these third-party and independent media sources. So how can we really keep in check with the media, and how can we force them to keep in check the other branches? The third-party news source plays a huge part of how we view things, and frankly, listeners off topic, I think the government should play a role in monitoring how the media runs. Now, I'm against a central government, just like I'm against a dictatorship, but I'm also against news that threatens the basic democracy of our nation. As I sit here this evening, my daughter is currently messing around on her phone. She is suspect of false and fake information, and these can drastically change the view that she has. Now, I think about Ben Shapiro. Is his information really accurate? How much can I trust that? We think how today these smaller independent media outlets can really turn our heads into different views, even though they may only have a few thousand clicks on Twitter. That few thousand people can quickly reproduce into many, many others. Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, two people who are close friends of mine, are able to use their platforms to influence and change people. But those are self-ran, self-opinionated shows. These men claim to share the news that holds the government in check. But then we see these reports that they are flat out wrong. Who can we trust? There is no distinct monitoring system. This influence is huge, and frankly, it is our job, citizens of this democracy, to hold those independent media outlets, both credible and those we know who are not credible, to make them hold other media outlets, the larger ones, CNN, NBC, Fox, to achieve political equality across this fourth branch of government. We must all keep each other in check, because this insane media industry will be the center of this debate for many, many generations.
Thanks for that, Pete. So, what are we to make of all this? This is certainly all potentially befuddling, and also pretty important, I think. Justin brought up an interesting point, which is that the sort of, symbiotic relationship that the media and democracy have with each other is nothing new. In fact, it's a very present force throughout American history. He brought up how yellow journalism is often argued to be one of the factors that led the U.S. to enter the Spanish-American War, because it spurred the public opinion, which shaped the popular will and its effects on the government's actions. And then there's World War I and II, during which both times the media played a role in how the war was received and how different nationalities were valued. And think of the Civil Rights Movement, and how the nightly TV news and its presentation of police officers' violence against black protesters at places like the March Against Washington swayed people in favor of the movement's leading goals. There are many more examples we could probably think of course. But the point we've sort of gleaned from here is this. The mass media has a heavy effect on public opinion. Public opinion will shape the popular will, or all those things that people want, and the popular will in many ways dictates what the government does and the policies and actions it carries out. But Justin brought up something else, which both Peter and Armitage later touched upon. The advance of technology, things like social media and the internet, have caused an unprecedented wave of independent media, or media that is not legacy media like NBC or CBS or Fox News or what have you. Prominent examples of independent media are conservative commentators Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder, podcast hosts such as Joe Rogan, left-wing commentators such as Kyle Kulinski and Sam Seder, and people like whatever you would describe Alex Jones. All these people have their own thing going on and delve into issues usually addressed in legacy media. And because of the internet, such commentary is more available to the people, and as a result has a chance to mold the popular will. For example, Bernie Sanders' appearance on Rogan's podcast, which boasts 10 million views on YouTube, swayed many to be more sympathetic to his views. One of the top comments? Thanks for showing us how utterly useless and obsolete corporate media has become. Another one? At this point, Joe Rogan does more for democracy than CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News put together. That one has 14,000 likes. But as Peter pointed out, there's also a pitfall, which is that such independent media is much more susceptible to faulty journalism and mistakes. He says that the people must hold both independent and legacy media accountable for their work. This shows that there is not only a relationship between the people and the government in which the people are simply a medium, but rather a relationship between the media and the people themselves that changes both the former and the latter. However, the upwards push is still much stronger. So, to review so far, number 1, the media molds the popular will. Number 2, the popular will dictates what the government does. It is clear from the historical examples that Justin gave that while the mass media influenced the actions of the government through the popular will, they never really checked the other branches of government in the way that Congress might veto the president, but rather moved the government to act as a single unit. So there's that. And mass media probably can't even be considered to be a fourth branch of government. Here's why. The initial idea that the mass media's responsibility to inform the public is essential to the functioning of a healthy democracy makes an assumption, which is something like this. The idea assumes that politics is something purely driven by information and how information shapes public policy. But we all know that this isn't the case. Politics is also very much driven by ideologies and ideas. And sometimes it's not even that. It's often about narrative building, or, as YouTuber ContraPoints once put it, politics is aesthetics. And, at least in the United States, circa 2019, the media is not so much an outside observer looking into a conflict of narrative-wielding groups, as much as it is simply another channel by which narratives are built and maintained. And because of things like the rise of independent media, which creates a very fragmented political and ideological and narrative-upholding landscape, in which such ideas are not in any hierarchy, that is, because of things like independent media, mass medias or corporate medias, sway has been given to others. So what we have now here in the end is a big mess, with everyone doing their own thing. Chaos has become the new norm. But, of course, these are just off-topic thoughts, and our final evaluation is still up to debate and speculation and study, especially because these are only a few ideas that we've been talking about here. So how does it check the government? It doesn't, but that's just our opinion. With Justin Idsoe, Peter from Fort Worth, Texas, and Amitoj Singh, I've talked as your host, Sharbin Sedino, and this has been The Off Topic.